League of Women Voters. Tonight, the League will be talking about Robinson's Rules of Order, and Ms. Marianne Robinson, a professor of Villanova Law School, is kind enough to teach us about it. She's not an expert in all the nuances of these rules, but she has chaired, moderated, and attended countless meetings in regards to these rules. And as a teacher and lawyer, she has the valuable perspective of understanding the rules and their importance in helping the processes and how it runs, helps run things smoothly and effectively. We are eager to have her share the basics of these parliamentary procedures that are widely used in civic groups, churches, governmental bodies, professional societies, and as well as nonprofit associations. And thank you for coming.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for coming. My goal for our time together is to help us see how procedural rules can help our groups function more effectively, because that's the point of procedural rules. It's to help people who are working together have a productive meeting and help them get things done. So we need to know a common language in order for that to happen. And if we know the common language and if we know the basic rules, then it helps us keep our meetings on track, right? So many groups have procedural rules that are spelled out in either their bylaws or that are spelled out in their written policies. Sometimes those rules will be detailed. Sometimes they'll be very basic, and then they'll refer to Robert's rules and say anything not covered here is covered by Robert's rules. And I think they do that because Robert's rules have been around for a very long time. I have a recent version of them, but there's much older versions. They've been around for a long time. This one is 716 pages long, so that's kind of ridiculous, right? And we're not going to cover all 716 pages by any means. The good news about if you have a copy of this is the index is really pretty good, so you can often find what you're looking for there, but sometimes it's easier to just think about what the basics are, and that's what we're going to try and do. So that's going to be our focus. So the purpose, and I put this at the top of the handout that I gave you all, our purpose is to show how major motions under Robert's Rules can help groups function as effectively as possible during meetings. And I'm going to deal tonight with what some parliamentarians consider the 7 major motions that can be made. They're fundamental motions. And I'm going to explain what each one of them is and how it works. And then we're going to try it out on a simple set of facts. That's the audience participation part, so get ready. Then there'll be time for questions at the end, but if there are questions as we go along, please don't feel like you have to wait till the end. Please feel free to interrupt me and ask them. Yes? Sure. It must be here. Okay, so as we discuss each of these motions tonight, you're going to see there's a pattern in how they come up. So the first thing that has to happen when you make a motion is you have to obtain the floor. So a member of the group will raise their hand. In some groups they stand, but usually it's that you raise your hand. And they have to do that when no one else is speaking and no one else has the floor. And then the chair will recognize them, and if the group is small enough, the chair will recognize them by name and call on them by name. And then the member who's been recognized by the chair makes the motion. I move that, and we'll go on with what some of those things might be. Then another member has to second that motion for it to continue. If nobody seconds it, it's dead. It's done. We're not going on with it. Now, seconding it does not mean that it doesn't obligate you to support it later. It doesn't carry any weight other than to say, have at least 2 people think that the group ought to be debating and discussing and voting on this. So a second can just be somebody else who wants to see it to continue to be discussed. So then the chair will usually restate the motion. It's been moved and seconded, and then that's when we go into debate or discussion on the merits of the motion. Now notice, we have to have a motion and a second before there's any discussion. So the discussion should not be happening first. The motion should be happening first, and really an organization can't do any business unless there's a motion on the floor. Once the debate is over and the discussion is over, then the chair will put the motion to a vote, and they'll usually take the question, they'll usually pose the question. All those in favor will say aye, all those opposed will say no or nay if they want to be really fancy. Sometimes they'll usually ask for abstentions, and then the chair will announce the result of the vote. So that's how they all go. But let's look at them each separately and see how they would all go with a few examples. So now I'm at your handout with the first one that's called a main motion. Again, it should be recognized by the chair. Then you would say, I move that, whatever you move. So let's just use a simple and kind of silly example. What if I said, I move that we order pizza to eat while we're talking about Robert's Rules? And then what would need to happen is that someone would need to second that. If somebody doesn't automatically second it, the chair would say there's a motion that we order pizza to eat while we're discussing Robert's Rules. Is there a second? Then hopefully someone would say second. Again, if nobody does, the motion's dead. We go on to some other business, right? But if somebody says there's a motion, if somebody says there's a second, then we move to discussion and debate. And the chair has to recognize people, as I said before they're allowed to speak. So they should recognize first the person who made the motion, to ask them to support why they have said that. So I could say something like, well, I'm hungry, I didn't get a chance to eat dinner, pizza's delicious, you all look hungry too, so please vote in favor of the motion to order pizza. And notice that I've done a couple things there. First of all, I've justified why I think we should order pizza. And second of all, I've asked you to vote in favor of it. So don't squander that opportunity talking a long time about something and then not closing it with what you want, how you want them to vote. You want to make sure that you've actually said what you want people to do. If the chair, so the chair is supposed to call on me, and then I can recognize, then they'll call on more people after they've let the person who made the motion talk, and the discussion ensues. When the discussion's over, the chair takes the vote, like we said. Again, we said usually it's a voice vote. It's going to depend a little bit on the organization's rules. Some organizations, particularly some governmental boards, require that you poll people so that everybody sees who voted how. But that's not under Robert's Rules. That would be a local governing board's rules. The other thing that can happen here is if the voice vote seems close, and especially if you're on the losing side, you can call for what's called a rising vote, and what that means is people show hands, okay? The way you do that is this, one of these silly things from Robert's Rules is you ask for a division of the House. So they take the vote, the chair says, all those in favor say aye, all those opposed say no, the chair says the ayes have it, and you say division of the House. And then the chair has to take a rising vote of raising hands. Now, I'm going to go back and get out of the pizza world, use a slightly different example here. So let's say our group, it might be a PTO, might be a school board, might be a township. Let's say they've decided they want to resurface the playground, and they're now talking about what kind of surface they're going to use. So let's say that I want to make a motion that we use sand. Okay, so I say, I move that we use sand to resurface the playground. And we wait for a second. And if there's no second, we're done. If there is a second, then the chair repeats the motion. There's a motion on the floor to use sand to resurface the playground. Is there any discussion? And again, turns to me because I've made the motion. And then I could say something like, well, I moved that we use sand to resurface the playground because sand provides a soft surface if children fall, plus it's inexpensive, and so it won't break our budget. And so for all those reasons, please support the motion and vote for the motion to use sand to resurface our playground. And then the chair would call on more people for a discussion and then take a vote, right? Now, I'm going to go to the second motion here because the second motion is a motion to amend. So let's say that there's this motion on the floor and you think it's sort of a good idea, but you'd like to tweak it a little bit, okay, you can make a motion to amend. This means you're just proposing a change to that main motion. So since it's a motion, you use the same format, right? You get recognized by the chair and you make a motion. So you say, I move to amend the motion by whatever it is that you want to change. So going back to pizza for a minute, I move to amend the motion to order pizza by striking the word pizza and substituting the word tacos. So now I'm changing the motion to be that we order tacos instead of pizza. So then again, we look for a second for this. If nobody else wants to talk about tacos, then there's no second, nothing happens. Otherwise, if there is a second, we go to discussion, and again, would recognize me first as the person who made the motion, and I would say, well, I moved to amend because we have pizza all the time. Tacos would be a nice change. They're really delicious. I think it'd be nice to have something different. So please vote in favor of amending the motion and substituting the word tacos for the word pizza. Now, notice that the discussion is only about the amendment. It's not about whether to order food. It's only about whether we should be talking about ordering tacos instead of pizza, right? So now, if this passes, then we go back to the main motion, but the main motion is now ordering tacos, and then we vote on that, okay? If it doesn't pass, then we're back to voting on pizza. So we haven't, when we vote on the amendment, we haven't voted whether to pass the main motion. We've just voted on whether to change the motion, okay? So that's a motion to amend. The third one that we're going to talk about is the motion to amend the amendment. And this is getting pretty attenuated now, but you can go one more step here and amend the amendment. So again, you can only make a motion to amend the amendment about that particular issue that the amendment is about. So it's tacos, right? No other area of the main motion can be changed at this time. So what if we wanted to substitute Chinese food for tacos, right? Then I move to amend the amendment by substituting the word Chinese for the word tacos, and then we would be voting on that. Now, since it's a motion, it's all the same. I've been recognized by the chair to make that motion. I have to have a second. We have to have discussion. I'm not going to get into why we'd have Chinese, but all those reasons. Let's go back for a minute to the playground. So if you remember, we had a motion to resurface the playground using sand, all right? So our second motion that we talked about, the motion to amend, could be a motion to use wood chips instead of sand, okay? If you wanted to do that, then you would say, I move we amend the main motion by striking the word sand and substituting the words wood chips. And then you would debate whether to substitute the words, whether it should be wood chips instead of sand. Again, you're only voting on whether or not wood chips instead of sand. You're not voting on the main motion yet, okay? Getting to this motion to amend the amendment, you could move, under this third way that we're doing it, I move to strike the words wood chips and substitute the word astroturf or artificial turf. So then you would be making the motion, it would change the motion to use astroturf or artificial turf to resurface the playground. You would get recognized for that, right? And the chair would ask you, if you had any discussion, and you would say, well, astroturf is very long-lasting. I think it would provide the best cushioning. I think it would, even though it's more expensive, it would last longer, so over the long run, the cost would be less. And then once you were done talking, the chair would recognize more people who could talk about the benefits or the detriments of astroturf, and then call for a vote, just like we've called for a vote in all these other ones. Now, that's as far as you can go. You can't amend the amendment to the amendment, right? That's 2 bites at the apple, and you're done. Then you have to move on. And if the amendment passes, then you vote on the main motion with the change. All right? If the amendment to the amendment passes, then you vote on the main motion with that second change. And then it's up or down on that. And if you want something yet different, it needs to be a new motion. Okay. So those are the ways that you make a motion and amend it. The next thing that you might want to do is, what if you want to get more information? So you have these motions on the floor and you feel like you need to know more. You don't feel like you're ready to vote. Well, there's a couple of different things that can happen then. One of them is you could make a motion to refer this to a committee. And so that's the fourth one on this front page of the handout. It's a motion to refer to a committee. So when more information's needed, and you know there's a committee out there that could study this and that you'd like to refer it to, that's when you make that motion. As part of that motion, you have to identify what the committee is and when they would report back. So we use the same format, be recognized by the chair, make the motion. So you would say, I move we refer this to blank committee to report back to us at this particular time, right? So staying with our resurfacing project for a minute for the playground, we could say, I move we refer this matter to the safety committee to report back to us at our next regularly scheduled meeting about the benefits of these different surfaces. The chair again repeats the motion, looks for a second. If there's a second to this, then you go to discussion and debate. You could say something like, I move that we refer this to the safety committee because they have more information about which playground surface is safest. So please vote in favor of the motion to refer this to the safety committee. And we take more discussion if there is more discussion. Now, can you amend that motion? You can, but only in two ways. One way is you could amend it for which committee it gets referred to. So you could make a motion to amend that motion and say, I move we strike safety committee and refer it to the playground committee instead. You could do that. Or you could say, you could make a motion to have it report back at a different time, report back at our meeting 2 months from now, or at a special meeting or sometime like that. But those are the only ways you can amend it. So this is a motion to refer it to committee. So then once the discussion is done, again, you take a vote, and if it passes, then the question goes to the committee, and the committee does a study, brings the study back to the organization, to the board, to the group, and then they can have a motion of whether to accept the committee's report or have a motion that's based on the committee's report then. So if you don't feel like you have enough information, that's one thing you can do. You can ask that it be referred to a committee. Another thing that you can do, and this is the next one on the list, is to have a motion to postpone. So if you want more time to think about the issue or more time to gather more information yourself, or if you represent constituents and you want to be able to consult with the constituents, then you make a motion to postpone. This is also called a motion to postpone to a certain time. It just puts the motion on hold, and it allows the members of the group to do more research, either on the motion or take the information back to their constituents or be able to discuss it outside the context of the meeting, right? Since it's a motion, you use the same format. Once again, you have to be recognized by the chair. You say, I move we postpone this matter until our next regularly scheduled meeting, or whenever, but that's sort of typical. Chair repeats the motion, asks for a second. Again, you need a second for it to continue, otherwise you're done. And then, assuming you get that second and there's discussion, chair recognizes the person who made the motion, and you say, well, I moved that we postpone this matter to another time because I'd like to do some research about how much cushioning artificial turf actually provides. I don't feel well enough informed to decide this matter today. I'd ask you to vote in favor of postponing it until the next meeting. Now, is this amendable? It's only amendable with respect to when you would postpone it until, right? So if you wanted to amend this motion, you could say a different time to have it, to have them reconsider it, but other than that, the motion is what it is. After the discussion is all over, take a vote. If it passes, it's postponed until whatever time you designated it to. So if it's your next regularly scheduled meeting, it's automatically on the agenda for that meeting. So it has to come up and be decided, voted up or down at that meeting. Okay, so because you postponed it to a time certain, a certain time, and the certain time is the next meeting. I'm making that distinction because I want us to, because when we talk about the next one, it's a little different. And that is a motion to lay it on the table. Now, you've probably heard this one before. People talk about tabling a motion or laying it on the table. I think that this one is often misunderstood, and I think it's frequently misused. In fact, I think most people really mean they want to postpone it, but instead they make a motion to lay it on the table because that's what they've heard before. Let me show you why I think this isn't what most people really mean. The motion to lay it on the table, it's supposed to be in lieu of more pressing business, right? So it's supposed to be that there's something else that you have to deal with first. So you're not saying, I want more information. You're not saying, I want to consult with my constituents. You're not saying, I want to send it to a committee. You're just saying, oh, gee, we really better take care of this thing that's happening right in front of us, and then we'll pick it back up. Now, the big difference between this and the motion to postpone is that for this motion, the motion to lay it on the table, there's no specific time when it comes back. You haven't specified a time that it comes back. And in fact, it doesn't come back until someone makes a motion to pick it up off the table. So once you lay it on the table, it's not on your ongoing agenda anymore until you pick it back up. So you would only do this when you can't sort of determine when you would pick it back up, right? So if there's something urgent in front of the board that you have to take care of, you're not sure whether you're going to be able to get to it during that meeting. Like, we have to deal with this, and then I don't know if we'll be able to pick it back up right then. So we'll lay it on the table, and then we'll make a motion to pick it back up. That would be when you would do it, when you sort of can't determine initially exactly when you're going to be able to pick it back up. But I think it gets misused. I think it gets used to sort of put it aside and have us not vote it up or down. And people think of it as a motion to postpone, but usually what you really want is a motion to postpone to a time certain. I'm not saying always, but I just think it's used a little more than it ought to be. But if it is what you want, then the motion is simple. You say, I move we lay this matter on the table in lieu of more important business. I move we lay this matter on the table in lieu of more important business. And the chair repeats the motion. Now, if the person making that motion hasn't identified right there what the more important business is, the chair should ask that person to say what that is, to actually explain it and identify what the more important business is. So I could say, I move we lay this matter on the table because it's nearly 8 o'clock, and we had invited the president of our local garden club to come speak to us at 8 o'clock about beautifying our grounds. They're here, they're waiting, so I asked for us to lay the motion on the table until that presentation is over, right? So one of the reasons I did a motion to lay on the table instead of a motion to postpone is I'm not sure how long that presentation is going to go. Maybe we can pick it back up later in the meeting. Maybe we can't pick it up till the next meeting. I'd like us maybe to be able to pick it up this meeting, so I'm not going to postpone it till the next meeting. I'm going to see when we can get back to it. So that's the idea. Another member can second. You need a second, like any other motion. You have to have a second. What's a little bit different here from any of the others we've talked about so far is that this goes immediately to a vote. There's no discussion. So a motion to lay on the table has no discussion. You vote it up or you vote it down. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense, right? Because what you're saying is there's urgent business we have to take care of. So we're not going to debate whether there's urgent business. We're going to decide it's urgent or we're going to decide it's not, right? So the idea that there's no discussion here makes perfect logical sense, right? Chair announces the result. So again, I just caution you to think about what you really want. It may be, but it's not the only way to postpone The other way to postpone is to postpone with a time certain. So those are the things you do if you need to interrupt, or you need to, if something interrupts you, or if you need more time to look at things. The next motion we're going to talk about helps you out if the discussion is just going on forever. We've all been in those meetings, right? It's just going on forever, and people seem to be repeating the same points. The discussion is not being fruitful at this point. Well, does that ever happen? Right? Anyway. So there's actually two things that you can do when that happens. There's one that's formal and there's one that's informal. I'm going to talk about the formal one first. So the formal one is a motion to move the previous question. So this motion is to stop discussion and to take a vote on the motion. So when you say, I move the previous question, you're just asking people to vote on whether to stop debating. Right? When you say, I move the previous question, you aren't yet voting on the main motion. You're just voting on whether to stop debate. Okay, so you make the motion all in the same format. You get recognized by the chair. You say, I move the previous question. The chair repeats the motion. There's no second. It's dead. If there is a second, you don't debate. Surprisingly, you don't debate whether you stop debating. Right? Why would you debate that? So the whole point here is that you're going to stop the debate. So if it goes immediately to a vote, there's no discussion, and it can't be amended. Another way that it's different from the other ones we've talked about is it requires a 2/3 majority vote to pass. All the others we've talked about have required simple majorities to pass. This requires a 2/3. And if you think about it again, see, a lot of these rules make sense, right? If you're going to cut off debate, 2/3 of the people in the room have to agree that we're cutting off debate. Otherwise, debate ought to continue, right? Because other people are finding the debate fruitful. So you need a 2/3 majority to have it pass. So now, if the motion passes, discussion stops, and you go back to vote on the main motion, right? So the whole point is you've had a motion, you're debating it, it's going on, and somebody moves the previous question. If that gets approved, then discussion is over, and you're voting on the main motion. That's the formal way to do it. There's an informal way to end discussion as well, but it's informal and it has no actual power to it. But I'm sure you've heard people do this, and I didn't put it on the sheet. I probably should have, but you've heard this in meetings, I'm sure, where somebody will say, call the question, right? Everybody heard them say, call the question? So what that means is you're just saying, you know, guys, I think we've had enough debate on this. Are we ready to vote? That's really what you're saying. You're giving the chair an opportunity to say to the crowd, you know, there's been a request to call the question. Notice it's not a motion. We're not going to vote on it. The chair just says there's been a request to call the question. Is there any more discussion? Now, if there is, discussion continues. But sometimes it gives everybody a second to go, oh, yeah, I'm ready. Yeah, I don't really need to say what I was going to say, right? I say this is informal because it has no power. You don't vote on it. If somebody wants to keep talking after somebody else calls the question, they can keep talking. Again, it's just a way to give the chair a chance to see if people are ready to vote. It gives us all a minute to think about it. But one person can't call the question and have debate end, right? And that's, I think, what some people think, that if somebody in the crowd yells, call the question, you've got to vote. No, that's not what happens. It's just a pause. It's just a pause. So that's our informal way of trying to end debate and take a vote. Those are the 7 fundamental motions that most organizations can get by with. I put 2 other incidental motions on the sheet here just because I thought you might like to know about them, because I think they're useful too. One of them is called a point of parliamentary procedure. This just isn't giving you an opportunity to ask where we are in the process. What can happen is, especially if you have amendments to amendments, is that people start talking and it gets a little confusing about where we are in the process and what's going on. So you could say, if that's happening, I raise a point of parliamentary procedure. And then the chair will say, what's your point? What is your point of parliamentary procedure? And you'll say, where the heck are we? No, you'll probably say something a little different than that, like, are we discussing the amendment? Are we discussing the amendment to amend? Or you can say, where are we in the process? What is the motion on the floor? Now, you're probably thinking, I don't want to do that because I'm going to look silly and it's going to look like I'm not paying attention. But the reality is that if you're confused, probably half the people in the room are confused too. And what you've done is you've given the chair the opportunity to recognize that confusion and clear it up. The other reason to do it is, meetings are difficult enough without sitting through a meeting where you're confused, right? So you're really wasting your time. If you're sitting there not sure where we are in the process, you might as well raise a point of parliamentary procedure to make sure that you do understand it. So again, you're usually helping the chair with this. You're giving the chair an opportunity to say, here's what we're discussing, and it can rein the discussion in a little bit. So I encourage you that if you think, where are we now? If you get to that point at all, don't be afraid to do this. Go ahead and ask. It'll give an opportunity to get everybody back on track. The last one is the point of order. The point of order, basically, you're saying you think someone's not following procedure. So this would be somebody who, there's an amendment and they're actually discussing the original motion and not the amendment, or something like that, some other point of procedure, or somebody got recognized out of turn or whatever. You would raise a point of order and the chair would rule on that. I should have said both those things. Point of parliamentary procedure and point of order are both things that don't take votes. The chair determines them. So when you say point of parliamentary procedure, the chair says where we are. Or if you happen to have a parliamentarian in your group, they'll turn to the parliamentarian and say, where are we? But usually it's the chair. The point of order is always the chair ruling on whether there's a point of order there. Questions so far? How we doing? So if you turn the page, in your handout, there's an example here. Why don't you take a minute and read through these 7 questions and see if you can determine which motion you'd use for them, and then we'll talk together. Let's just take 2 minutes to read through, okay? And then we can talk about them. Everybody get a chance to look at them? Okay, this is the audience participation part then. So what if you wanted to propose that our organization plant tulips in front of the Township Municipal Building? What kind of motion would you use there? A main motion, exactly. Do you want to try it?
I propose that we plant tulips in front of the Township Building this spring.
Yeah, there you go. The only change I'd make to what you said is I'd make it, I move, as opposed to I propose. Yes, okay, perfect, right? So yes, and I have a second over here. And so now, do we want to discuss it? Let's say no. Although I'm happy to discuss it with you if you'd like. After our discussion, I'm the chair, I would call for a vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Anybody want a rising vote? No? Okay. What, did I tell you how to ask for that? Yes. Anybody remember? Division of the House, and then I would need you to show hands. Okay, very good. Okay, now, what if you kind of like the idea of flowers, but you think it ought to be daffodils instead of tulips? What kind of motion is that? Amend. Perfect. Do you want to try it? Anybody want to give it a try? Yeah, go ahead.
I make a motion, we amend the motion to plant daisies.
The motion was to plant tulips. The original. Okay. Daffodils. So I move, we amend the motion to plant tulips in front of the township building by striking the word tulips and substituting the word daffodils. Okay? That's the motion to amend. Again, we'll call for a second. Second, we'll discuss only the question of whether to substitute daffodils for tulips. Okay? We're not voting yet on the question of whether or not to plant flowers. We're just voting on the question of whether, when we talk about it, it ought to be daffodils instead of tulips. Okay? So if that passes, we go back now and vote on the motion of whether to plant daffodils. Right? We can go a third time. What if we want it to be daisies? Yeah, you get it, right? It's the same thing. I move we amend the motion to amend by striking the word daffodils, substituting the word daisies. Again, we'd call for a second. We'd take the vote. What if you know there's a beautification committee and you'd like to know what they think about what would look best and what would actually be able to grow there? What would you do then? Yeah? Perfect, yes. Want to try it?
Yes, I make a motion that we refer this to committee.
Okay. And when would we like them to report back?
Next meeting.
Next meeting, perfect. So now we have a motion that it be referred to the beautification committee for them to report back at the next meeting. We'd take a second, we'd have discussion about it, and then we'd take a vote, okay? If you think it should go to a different committee or you want them to report back at a different time, you could make a motion to amend that, okay? What if you want to think about it for a while? Maybe you have constituents and you want to know what they'd prefer about flowers. What kind of motion would you make? Motion to postpone, exactly. Anybody want to try it? Okay. So you've put together the motion and the reason for the motion there. So we'd probably start with just the motion, and then you'd make your argument second. So you would say, just as you did, I move we postpone this matter to our next regularly scheduled meeting, and then if there's a second and we had discussion, then the chair would call on you and you would say, I need to take it back to my constituents and find out what they think. Very good. What if the discussion's gone on for a long time and there's an invited speaker that's coming and you'd like to interrupt the discussion in order to have the invited speaker speak? What kind of motion would we use?
The previous question.
Well, the previous question is going to call the question right then, right? So is that what we want to do?
Yeah.
I think we want to postpone
I
it
make a
some-
motion that we lay the motion on the table.
Yes, I think that's what we would do. We'd lay the motion on the table, or we could make a motion to postpone. But the motion on the table works here particularly well because we have this immediate thing that's happening, and then we can vote to pick it back up later. Remember, when we lay it on the table, we have to vote also to pick it back up. And then finally, what if the discussion's going on forever and you want to end it? Now you got it.
Now we'll go to the previous question.
Now we'll go to
Thank
moving
you.
the previous question. Perfect. I move the previous question, the chair repeats it, gets a second. Now remember, this one goes immediately to a vote, right? There's no discussion about it. We would go immediately to the vote about whether or not to plant the daffodils, if that's where we are, wherever we are on it, okay? Remember also that this takes a 2/3 majority to pass to call the previous question. And to move the previous question. And what was the informal solution? That's our formal solution. What was the informal solution that we could use there instead of moving the previous question? Anybody remember? Call the question. Yeah, look, everybody's calling the question. That's terrific. Okay, so that's the other thing, ready to vote. Okay, so this is all in case you didn't discover it. You've got a cheat sheet with all that same information on the last 2 pages. With, again, the names of the motion and these samples of motions and the format that it would go through, the steps that would have to be followed, and the fact that the one of them that we talked about needs a 2/3 rather than a simple majority, but the others are all simple majority, right? So there's one more motion I would like to mention. What would it be if we wanted to end now? What would you? Motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second. And now there's no discussion. We would go immediately to a vote. All right? Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
I've been in a lot of meetings where when people want to amend motions, when people want to amend motions, they will ask the party who made the original motion whether they are open to an amendment of the following character. Is that just a matter of courtesy?
Yeah.
But not required by the rules?
Right. It's just a matter of courtesy. And the chair can allow that or not. Yeah.
I'm always concerned about people who are in the audience and they want to take over the meeting. How does the chair handle that?
Well, I'm going to give you every lawyer's favorite answer to that question, which is it depends. And it really depends on what's happening in the meeting and where you are. So I assume that you're talking about there being members of the public who are, and it's open discussion time, right? As opposed to
Yes.
members of the board or members of the, because most of what we've talked about here are members of,
Of
all
the
of what
co-
we've talked about here
are on the committee.
apply people on the
Yes.
committee or on the board. So the board really needs to have, the board chair really needs to have control of this and needs to have established what the rules are. So if there's a time limit on how long people are allowed to talk, I mean, that should be written policy. There should be formal procedures laid out for how you handle audience and members of the public at a meeting like that.
Okay.
I'm sure Robert's Rules handles that. If they do, I don't know about it. It's possible, but I don't think so.
Is that in the bylaws?
Yes, it could be in the
Bylaws of the township or the school board
Or the-
or
yes.
the,
Or it could
Shade
be,
Commission.
it could just be a written policy. They could just adopt a written policy that handles that. That's what a lot of boards do. As opposed to going to all the trouble of amending bylaws, they'll just adopt a written policy that says how to handle it. Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Well, thank you. Do we have more questions that people would ask Mary Ann Robinson? All right, I'm going to my husband too. All right, honey, you get the
You made her
mic.
get up. Huh?
Wait a minute, no, you must use the
Thank you. If a particular debate looks like it's going to need a special set of rules, can you, as the presiding person, ask for a motion to establish a set of rules for that particular debate and then have the meeting live by them whatever they might be.
I think so. But again, I'm not a total expert on this, so I would need to look it up to see how that is. But typically, an organization can, a board or a committee, any kind of group can adopt whatever rules they want, and they can be limited. So there's no reason, I can't see any reason why you couldn't do that. But it might be tricky to do, because if you're already in a debate that you see is that you need special rules for, and you then introduce a rule, attempt to introduce special rules, I could see that supplanting the problem you're already having. So it's going to take a really skilled chair to make that work. Yeah. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. It's been fun.